Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I will be moderating today's session. We've got an exciting presentation ahead of us today, but before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the discussion, it will be made available to rewatch. You will receive an email after the webinar concludes with a link to access the on-demand. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A tab. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab. Let us know your thoughts or just say a quick hello. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, we will be having a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Stick around to see if you are one of our lucky winners. Our topic today is Tales from the Field, Trends in Infrastructure as Code. I'm joined today by Tim Davis and Andrew Way from M0. I will now let Tim Davis take it away from here. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having us, Cody. I am Tim Davis. I'm the DevOps advocate with M0. And if you're a returning M0 webinar user, thanks for coming back. If you are brand new, welcome. We are absolutely glad to have you. Hopefully this is helpful for you. Feel free to ask your questions at any point in time. We love to take the questions, go off on tangents. This time is for you. We want to make sure that you get what you want out of it. Generally in these, it's just me kind of talking about stuff. Sometimes I'm having conversations with folks. And today I am having a conversation here with our principal sales engineer, Andrew Way.
Hello. So yeah, as Tim's saying, we're going to be talking about Tales from the Field and Trends in Infrastructure as Code. So I want to give you a quick overview of the agenda, or a quick introduction on M0 if this is your first time attending a webinar with us. And one of the things that will help this conversation is talk about infrastructure as code maturity spectrum. Then we'll talk about the trends, what we're seeing out in the field, and discuss those challenges. If we have time, we'll do a quick demo of M0 and how we help address some of those challenges that we're seeing.
Should be a good one.
So just quickly, what's our mission? M0's mission is to enable DevOps engineers and teams to collaborate on and automate the provisioning of Terraform, Terragrunt, and other infrastructure as code frameworks. Really, we're seeking DevOps teams, making their lives easier, providing value to the developers as soon as possible. Tim already gave a quick introduction. I'll give mine. Again, I'm principal sales engineer, previously from Microsoft and Armory. Always been a sales engineer there, and really enjoy helping DevOps teams figure out how to deliver value faster to their constituents, the developers deploying infrastructure and deploying applications.
And that's actually super important. You want to help them, solve problems faster, deliver features faster. And that's one of the pinnacles of DevOps is like failing faster, closing that loop, making sure that everybody just kind of speeds up in general. Previously to here, I worked at VMware as part of a small group of people that started the Cloud Developer Advocacy Program there. Before that, I was actually a systems engineer myself, working in the networking and security business unit. And before that, working as an architect and a systems engineer across the board for, all kinds of infrastructure products. I like to make the joke that I bring the ops to DevOps, and it's definitely a great space to be in. I think M0 is doing awesome stuff, and it kind of between Andrew and I here, we've had a lot of experience, not only working with the field, but I worked in the field as, an end user for the longest time. So if you have questions, definitely feel free to let us know. Because like I mentioned, we are here for you.
To kick off this conversation, I think one of the things we wanted to talk about is this maturity spectrum. Whether or not to first identify where you are on the spectrum to understand when these challenges are going to start, when are you going to start seeing what we're seeing out in the field. Mm-hmm. So one of the key concepts that we like to think about is where the developer lifecycle, and you're thinking about the tooling. And real quickly, we have a quick poll here. Do you use Terraform or some other infrastructure as code tools today? Just quickly give it a shout out so we understand where our audience is coming from. So it was talking about developer lifecycle, and one of the things we're seeing with DevOps and infrastructure as code, it's following a very similar type of theme of so it's akin to that lifecycle process where now we're seeing tools like M0 building on top of that automation. So starting with stage one, a lot of people are just getting into infrastructure as code. They're just starting to build out that Terraform pipeline.
And it actually looks like, so we've got 19 responses to the poll so far as of right now. And it actually looks like we have some folks that are a little to the left of stage one here. So stage 0 absolutely exists. If you haven't started yet, if you're just, Googling it and looking around, if you're going to webinars like this to kind of learn, you absolutely, are getting there. But I would definitely call that a pre-building and just kind of looking that up. But, out of 20 so far, we've got 8 folks here that are using it today. And then we've got 5 that are within this year and 8 that are next year plus. So we definitely have a good mix of folks that are using it now and, that are looking to get into it here sometime soon.
And even for the people that are using it now, what we're seeing is there's a lot of them are still at the infancy stage, what I call the infancy stage, where they're running Terraform most likely within their own console. The more advanced users maybe have built it into their CI system. So we're talking about stage 2 and stage 3, where multiple users are using the infrastructure defined like Terraform or CloudFormation, and then using Jenkins or Circle CI to start automating those Terraform runs. But what we're really hoping to build out towards the future is this idea of democratization, being able to provide developers the ability to self-serve their own infrastructure. Now, the problem is developers don't know a lot about infrastructure. So how do we make that easier for them? How do we give them the ability to do that, but also create those controls, the safety net for the DevOps teams and security team to feel secure that, yes, we can give those guys the ability to deploy their infrastructure.
And that's something that I actually talk about a lot in the community and out at, conferences and events and stuff like that. A lot of like infrastructure folks, and they just think that infrastructure as code means that their job is being taken away and given to a developer. And that's simply not the case. Now, that doesn't mean that the development team isn't going to be writing the code for that, because it is still programming and, sometimes that job is offloaded. But the design of the infrastructure, the, day-to-day operations of the infrastructure, that still takes an infrastructure team. It still takes an operations team. So I always like to make sure to, put folks at ease that just because you're going to the route of infrastructure as code doesn't mean that infrastructure is not necessary anymore, that you still don't need a network team and a security team and all of that.
One last comment I would like to make about this is typically later on you might be asking whether or not a tool like M0 is right for you. We're typically helping customers at this building and scaling stage to get to this automation and self-service stage. So if you're just getting started, perhaps it's not right for you because you still need to get used to understanding what are those challenges you're going to have with infrastructure as code. But once you feel like you've gotten that down, or you have a strong plan about your adoption cycle, come talk to us. We'll help you move along this spectrum. So let's talk about trends. Tim, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is something where, the question may come up of what, why are we qualified to talk about this? And really, Andrew and I are talking to, customers day in and day out about, what they're doing, how they're doing it, what their wants and things like that are. And these are kind of some of the things that we found that are coming up here. So for the first one here, like greater adoption of infrastructure as code frameworks, we're seeing that more and more and more. And some of it is on purpose. Some of it I've seen isn't. Some folks are just going the route of Terraform. They're wanting to make a more repeatable structure for their infrastructure builds so that, for disaster recovery purposes, if it gets nuked, run another apply and fix it. But there's also some that's kind of an accident. You've got folks that are out in AWS and Google and Azure, and they're using things like CloudFormation templates to spin stuff up. that's infrastructure as code. Whether you know it or not, you're actually using infrastructure as code. If you're using ARM templates in Azure, like you go to, somewhere, you find a demo app and you go and deploy it, you're using infrastructure as code. So we're definitely seeing more and more of that out there, as opposed to the old like click ops mentality where you're just going out and clicking through and deploying what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think one of the greatest challenges that they're trying to solve is this ability to have repeatability, to be able to deploy their infrastructure in a known manner. So I think the need naturally makes sense why DevOps teams are adopting these infrastructure as code frameworks.
Exactly.
And I think the next,
right.
next thing we see is this policy enforcement. Now that we have the ability to define the infrastructure as code, how do we start making sure that the infrastructure that we're defining follows some sort of policy, making sure that we're not opening up ports randomly for the world to access, or making your S3 bucket publicly readable. So how do we help build that into your infrastructure as code framework?
I think this is where we're supposed to shout out, Open Policy Agent and the other policy as code frameworks. Because these days, if you're doing infrastructure as code, you might as well do policy as code and security as code and testing as code. At this point in time, there is everything as code. But when you are making these repeatable infrastructure pieces, you're moving from like statically deployed environments to more dynamically deployed environments. You need to make sure that while you're speeding this up, you're also making sure that you keep those guardrails on, that you're not deploying to regions that you're not supposed to. You're not, deploying, like Andrew said, open S3 buckets. So definitely making sure that you've got policy enforcement and stuff like that. We're seeing more and more of that coming around. If you're a Terraform cloud user, you may have heard of Sentinel. So that's a policy as code framework, kind of like Open Policy Agent. It's just kind of, locked into Terraform Cloud specific.
And yeah, sometimes those policies aren't even really security related, but simply just business processes related. How do I make sure that all of my resources are tagged appropriately so that we can go back and do auditing on the resources that have been deployed? How do we make sure that we have followed even a naming convention for the resources? Again, just so that I can go back and audit what was deployed.
Well, how about a smooth segue of how do we make sure that what we're deploying isn't going to overrun our cost budget by saying you can only deploy small and medium instances instead of 2 extra large instances?
Exactly. And well, that leads us to the other trend, which is cost estimation and cost monitoring. Time and time again, the people we talk to want to understand how much potentially in terms of cost estimation, the resources are going to cost them, so that they can make informed decisions on whether or not to deploy this resource, or simply just to catch mistakes, accidental sizing, accidental for eaches or counts that are explosive. You can.
I may or may not have accidentally deployed 100 EC2 instances instead of 10 at some point in time. So that was my bad.
So with your infrastructure as code frameworks, being able to see those cost estimations before you run the apply gives you a good understanding of whether or not you're going to incur a huge cost. But then sometimes resources can't be measured before they're deployed. Load balancers, networking, S3 bucket consumption, all these resource-based usage resources, you can't understand or estimate those costs ahead of time. That's where cost monitoring comes in.
Absolutely. And the trends that we're seeing, out there is there's a couple of different things that people are asking for when it comes to cost monitoring. It's not just estimation of, hey, how much might this cost me when I deploy it out into the cloud? It's also how much is it costing me? Now, there's a really key factor with that of what are you deploying? And cost monitoring, it is such a huge thing. There are so many different factors in there. For example, if you look at the price of an EC2 instance from AWS, it's a pretty static cost. They can tell you how much it's going to cost you every hour. Well, what about usage-based things like Lambda functions? Those are usage-based, so the more you use them, the more they cost. You're not really necessarily sure how many times am I going to instantiate this function in an hour. So being able to estimate that, it's kind of a tricky business. If you have the estimated number of how many times you're going to execute it, it's a little easier to kind of pull that estimate together. But not only having an idea of how much something might cost you when you deploy it can help you for if you're going to approve that deployment or not, but then also how much is it actually costing me, week over week or month over month.
So quick question, Tim. Is there something that we've built for the community to help monitor tech?
This is where we're going to shout out TerraTag. So for all of you folks that said you are using infrastructure as code today, specifically Terraform, we have open sourced a piece of our platform called TerraTag. You can find that at TerraTag, TerraTag.io. It is completely free to use. It's out there on GitHub. And what it'll do is it'll allow you to recursively search all of your infrastructure as code files across AWS, Azure, and Google, and it will put tags inside of these. So not only is this helpful for us when it comes to doing actual cost over time in our platform, tags are useful pretty much anywhere from an organizational standpoint. If you're using other third-party cloud management features or platforms, or if you're using any other costing platforms, feel free to go out there, use this. It'll help you immensely with your organization. It's not something that, we can make money on just by itself. We thought it would help the community, so it's y'all's to use. Feel free to, give us a star, open up an issue, open up a pull request. It is, open for the community.
Which leads us to the next conversation. It's custom approval flow. Actually, this is not just about approval flows, but really about custom flows, which is something that we're seeing time and time again, related to policy enforcement as well. How do we automate our Terraform deployment process, but at the same time, automate other surrounding actions? For example, the TerraScan, or the being able to scan for policies, being able to scan for security, or how do we integrate with Jira or ServiceNow so that we have custom ticketing go through those tools as well?
Or what about what happens after the infrastructure is deployed? I mean, we're not just deploying infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. We're deploying it to run an application of some sort. So being able to fire off your, chefs and puppets and Ansibles after the fact to do that configuration management, that's definitely something we're seeing a lot of. So that's just kind of what comes next.
Exactly. And right now, what we're seeing, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but just a quick preview. One of the things that we see right now in the field in terms of customer approval flows is a simple Lambda function that can then notify anybody you want within using the Lambda your infrastructure has been deployed, and to trigger those next steps, whether it be auditing or the application deployment. In terms of other trends, we're also seeing self-service. So naturally, we were talking about this a lot earlier in terms of the maturity, giving developers the ability to deploy their own infrastructure.
This is a trend that we hear about constantly, but not a lot of customers are just there yet. We get the customers that are like, hey, I'm a single, infrastructure guy or developer. I'm running Terraform for my laptop. I want a couple of people from the team to start using it too. So we're starting to find those scaling issues like you have with infrastructure as code. So being able to centralize all that together in one place allows teams to collaborate on these workflows a lot better. But everybody wants to just go from, hey, I'm automating some Terraform to I want full self-service. And this has been a conversation, not just in infrastructure as code, but I mean, cloud management platforms for, at this point in time, around a decade. When I was back at VMware, like they were working on automation platforms and all customers wanted was, I want a catalog so they could go do their stuff. And it takes a lot to get there. A lot of customers aren't necessarily ready yet. Folks like us are here to help you get there step by step. As long as you're ready to start automating, great. But sometimes, you can expect to jump in there, and we can help you start automating those workflows. You can start kind of taking those baby steps, but getting to a true self-service model, everybody wants it. Not everybody is ready to go day one. So just make sure that if that is what you want, just don't go into it thinking it's going to be like super easy, or, it might be easy, but it's going to take a little time, or it's going to take a little, front loading of effort. But hey, as long as you take it step by step by step, and you have a good trusted partner with you, whether it be us or somebody else, it's absolutely possible. And it seems to be where everybody kind of wants to go.
And that leads us straight to the last trend, is custom tooling. So before the people that we talk to find out about us, they're constantly thinking about the whole build versus buy mentality, right? But sometimes the problem is they don't even know that you could buy a tool like us.
They're we have developers. Why don't we just develop something?
Exactly. Why not spend our time building out the features that we've already built?
Yep.
So, but naturally, this comes into play because you have your own custom tooling. And the way to get that fit within your own ecosystem is to build on top of that custom tooling. And I think that's probably one of the right. That's one of the biggest challenges of the enterprise companies we're working with, is they have this legacy system that they need to integrate with. Can a tool like M0 integrate with those tools? But before they start thinking about that, they're thinking about, okay, so what can we do on our own to do that? So that will lead us to the next conversation, is those challenges. So what are those top challenges? And I think we've been addressing them throughout this conversation. The first one is automation. When you're building your own tool, you naturally want to automate that process. And where do we automate with? What you currently have, your CI tool. How do we build our Terraform deployment process into continuous integration? But what kind of problems does that cause us, Tim?
Man, I think that would be a great question for you, considering we stole you from a CI/CD company. How many of your customers were wanting to automate Terraform? And I mean, I'm sure there's a way to do it, but if you use those existing tools, CI/CD platforms are awesome. They're great. I have a lot of experience with them, from VMware and everything. If you're doing application from build, test to deploy, awesome. They're not perfect for infrastructure as code, because while infrastructure as code is code, and it is kind of an application, so to speak, you write your code and it builds stuff, it's not really the same process. And there's a lot of day 2+ operational stuff that comes into play. I mean, if you're using CI/CD for your application, great. It's going to build it. It's going to test it. It's going to deploy it out to, your prod infrastructure. No problem. Now, what happens if you want to delete stuff? What happens when you're done with with that? With infrastructure, usually when you're deploying fast, there's going to be an end date. So if you're doing like ephemeral developer environments, they're only going to be deployed while the developer's testing, then it's going to blow it away. So CI/CD platforms, while they will process all that stuff and they will deploy it out, it's not really going to be concerned with how long it's been deployed, what's happening while it's deployed. If you need to make updates, when's the end date of that? When do I need to run the Terraform destroy or what have you? There's also inherent issues with who can do stuff. Integrating role-based access control in a CI/CD solution, it's not easy. It's not. Most of them just flat out don't support it. It's just one of those things where you either give people access to it or you don't, and then you use RBAC on your GitHub repository to say who can make those commits to trigger that pipeline. So there's all kinds of different issues that come along with utilizing the tools that you already have. Totally understand trying to save yourself money and why invest in another tool when this one can kind of do it. But it's really one of those things where with DevOps, it's great because you get to kind of choose the best of breed for what. It's not like, legacy enterprise where you just buy a giant suite of tools that kind of does it all okay. With DevOps, you get to duct tape and baling wire all the best things together to make it work great for you. And when it comes to infrastructure as code automation, there are much better tools out there than just the stuff you've already got.
And that's a great segue to just the second challenge that we're seeing in teams and governance in terms of RBAC. When environment and resource has been deployed, how do we know who can have access to it to make changes? How do we know even what values were used when that deployment happened. So one of the things I hear a lot while working with the customers is they need a centralized tool to understand and share those processes. Because before, it used to just be one person on their terminal deploying those resources, and that person gets sick. Now they have a fire. How do they even fix it? Nobody knows how to fix it. So
yeah, I mean, your state file, your variable file, everything is just stored on this person's, C drive somewhere, and they just don't know. Nobody has any idea. Now, I've seen some folks try to solve this issue by simply spinning up a server on, the network somewhere, installing Terraform, and that's their centralized Terraform. Now, of course, that's a lot better, so to speak. But it's not really the same thing as, a true automation platform that'll allow you to, have a lot better visibility into all of that.
yeah, and besides, while that might solve the visibility, now how do you solve the problem for governance? So how do you make sure that you're giving the right people right access? Tim alluded to earlier. You could do it with your Git repo and permissions within Git. That only takes you so far. What about people who just simply need to audit? Managers that need to go in and approve these deployment processes?
Not everybody needs the ability to, commit and push to the repository and trigger a pipeline.
Exactly.
Or maybe they need the ability to, commit and push, but somebody needs to make sure they hit a little button before that pipeline actually pushes all the way through to production. There's so many different factors in how you have your infrastructure set up, how you have your, Git or other repository structures set up, how you need, your different environments, because the role-based access control that you would need in development, where it's just a sandbox and people can do what they want, is very different than the role-based access control you need to push to production.
And last part of the challenge, we talked a lot about this already, is self-service. Again, just to reiterate this, teams are wanting to get out of, DevOps team want to get out of the way for developers. They want to empower them. Part of their goals are to help improve their performance and increase their velocity. And by creating it and giving them the ability to deploy their own resources really helps empower the developers to move fast and deploy faster.
And there's one thing that I like to point out. So like for this, a lot of the challenges of self-service for number 3 here, you really have to make sure that you've done your due diligence and solved a lot of the problems of number 1 and number 2 first, or it's going to cause a lot of problems. Like if you aren't completely secure in your automation practices and how you have all those workflows set up, if you're not entirely confident in your teams and governance of who can deploy what and where and with what and how and why and all that kind of stuff, then opening up the floodgates and giving them self-service, you're just going to have a bad time. It's going to be difficult. So making sure that you solve these, and in all fairness, if you try to work on these in this order, you'll have a lot better and easier time. Because first of all, just automating the workflows, you keep the people who have access to these workflows very small. And then eventually you add that teams and governance and you kind of scale out a little bit. And then once all of that is set and in place and you're confident, you can open up that, self-service ability so that people can just come in and get what they want when they want.
There's some questions in the Q&A section. One on TerraTag. Is TerraTag limited to Terraform artifacts only?
So at this current point in time, yes, Terraform was written, or TerraTag was specifically written for Terraform. So we don't support TerraGrunt or Pulumi or anything like that at this point. Now, whether that does or not, that's really up to Roni. So I'm not quite sure about that. But as of right now, yes, TerraTag is only a Terraform construct tool. And let's see, I would like an IaC GitOps tool as Argo CD is for Kubernetes. But as long as each cloud goes its own way, I see it complicated. What do you guys think about the possibility of GitOps for IaC? Awesome. So let's see. We have about a half hour, and you found my trigger word. So I'm just going to rant for about 30 minutes here. GitOps is, to me, a horribly overused word in the industry. And it definitely sounds like, with you name dropping Argo CD and everything here, you're on the right path. Absolutely. GitOps as a workflow is not necessarily what some people think of, just putting your infrastructure as code files in Git and deploying it. GitOps, truly, for the folks that aren't familiar with what the term means, it was a very specific term coined by Weaveworks. And GitOps is essentially, if you boil it all the way down, it's infrastructure updates by pull request. So, I mean, it is very developer methodology when it comes to your infrastructure. So your Git is your single source of truth for your infrastructure as code files. So whatever is in your Git repository should 100% reflect what is deployed into production or development or wherever that is. The only difference would be the very brief amount of time that you have opened up a pull request, you've merged it, and there is a deployment pipeline running to make those updates. And at the same token, you are also doing your performance testing, your smoke testing, and everything like that on the pull request itself before that's actually merged. So you want to make sure that everything is tested and ready to go before you deploy that back. Now, with all of that craziness said, for us as a company and as a platform, our three main use cases, which happen to be listed right here, of infrastructure as code automation, teams and governance, and self-service. If we think of infrastructure as code automation, this is our number one use case. This is what most of our customers come to us wanting and end up doing with us. Now, some of those are GitOps methodology, some of them are not, but for the most part, they end up being the GitOps methodology. So they have their Terraform or their infrastructure as code files in their Git repository. They take our tool, they create a template, they point it over at their repository, and with that, we can also integrate into with them. We can do things like plan on pull requests. So whenever a pull request is opened against the main branch, we can then go through, run a little, Terraform plan or what have you, and say, hey, if you were to merge this, this is exactly what's going to happen. You're going to add one of these things, you're going to remove one of these things or what have you, which is part of the GitOps methodology of making sure you're doing that testing and you know exactly what's going to happen before you merge that back to the main branch for deployment. So a GitOps tool for infrastructure as code automation is exactly what you would want to do that correctly. Now, if you go full on with GitOps or you just, do infrastructure updates by pull request, is up to you. There is a niche of tooling, which we are a part of, called TACOs, Terraform Automation and Collaboration Software. And that consists of us, M0. There is Scalar, Spacelift, and then, of course, Terraform Cloud. And all of these tools give you the ability to enable GitOps lifecycling. Now, there are pros and cons to every single one of us. I would obviously, lean towards us. I may or may not be biased. Who knows? I think we are doing this the best when it comes to user experience and to extensibility because of our custom flows. But really, any of these four platforms will allow you to take your Terraform files, or really for us at least, any of your infrastructure as code automation files, and enable that GitOps workflow. All right, I did it in 3 minutes. We're good.
Maybe now is a good time to do a quick demo of M0 and talk a little bit about that GitOps workflow.
I think that sounds great. It's great, Carlos, that you asked that question, because really that is probably primarily our most used use case across all of our different customers is infrastructure as code automation. And because of the plan on pull requests and stuff, it just ends up being a GitOps methodology.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and show you around the M0 user interface. Right now, let me go back to the organization. I am in a fictitious organization called Acting FinTech Company. And you can see on the left here, I have a lot of different projects. And let me move my camera this way so you can see me pretend looking at the camera. So I have projects, I have all sorts of projects. And you can think of a project as a logical container for your environments, the environments that you deploy with M0. So let's start with the first use case of just simply configuring automation and set up that GitOps workflow. So here, for example, I have a server that's being deployed following this template. You can see here let me go to my triggers. In my trigger section, I can redeploy on every push to the skip branch and also run a Terraform plan on pull request. And if I look at my deployment history, I can see here I have a deployment that's been triggered by me and it's waiting for approval. And I also have these PRs waiting for a plan. So let's find out what's going on with this deployment. Looks like I'm going to be adding and changing this EC2 instance. I'm replacing with a new updated AMI. So let me just continue and improve this process. Walking through this process, what we do naturally with every Terraform deployment is we clone the repo, we'll set up the state, we'll perform a Terraform init, we'll tag the resources, as we mentioned earlier, for cost monitoring, and then we'll run the apply since we approved the plan. And you can see here also we have a cost estimation. We can see that it's estimating roughly $14.52 a month, an increase of 10 cents from the additional EBS volume charge, and it's run the apply. This is how a DevOps team member can deploy an infrastructure and maintain consistency and have that teams and governance and provide those roles. Let me show you real quickly how a developer could come in and deploy their own resource given the right permissions. So let's say here, for example, I am writing up my code. I'm going to make a change to my instance and hard code this for purposes of demonstration.
I like that you point that out.
Yeah, you wouldn't do this in real. And let's push this up. So I have this feature branch that I created today. And let's go back to my Greenfield dev. I've already configured this environment to trigger when any changes on this branch has occurred. I can look at the deployment history and see that, oh, this is actually triggered from my GitHub user. So it's currently in process. And if I go in and wait for the plan, we can see that the plan should show exactly the change, the hard-coded change to T3A medium. And I also can see the cost estimation here too as well, that I'm increasing my cost dramatically up to $28 a month. Now, because this is a dev environment, I'm auto approving those deployments, so it's going to go ahead and deploy. Now I'll say that I've completed my changes and I'm ready to commit this into my main branch. So here I have this PR already configured. And you can see the PR has also sent this cost estimation on what it would look, what kind of changes would occur on my production instance. So here is my DB service commercial. And it looks like I will also affect my production instance and increasing that from a T3 small to T3 medium.
So one thing to point out here is with.
Go ahead. Tim, still there? I can't hear Tim, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue. You can see the plan details here, and you can also click on the full plan logs to dive deep to get right into M0 interface to see what's going on there as well. Let's go back and merge this pull request. And then what I'm going to show you then, after I merge it, is how in my production environment, You can see here the deployment's already in progress since I merged it. You can see the PR plan earlier, and this just kicked off a few seconds ago. So now I have this GitOps process from my PR and merge to main, and now it's deploying and going through this process. And I still have RBAC around this, where if I showed you, for example, in my other window here, this is an example of a developer who doesn't have full access to deploy. So you can see here, let's see, merchants. Okay, all of these have been approved. Oh, here, waiting for approval. So here's an environment where it's waiting for approval. But because I'm logged in as a lower user, I won't be able to approve this deployment. I guess while Tim is still getting back, let me show you another workflow we talked about. Another request that we've been seeing out in the field is this custom flow. And for that, I've recorded a quick video to show you it working. Let's see.
Well, that was interesting. Did you miss me? My whole computer literally just shut off. It didn't reboot. It didn't do anything. It just shut off. Anyways, so you're still doing demo. I was in the middle of trying to tell folks that we've got customers that literally aren't even giving their developers access to the M0 platform. They're, as far as their developers know, when they do a commit, they get our comments from M0 and it triggers what they want. There's a couple of DevOps engineers that are doing everything in the M0 platform. So that was just something that I wanted to point out. Sorry, I dropped into nowhere there for a moment.
No problem. I took the time to show them the manual approval process. So there's a video here of us creating a static S3 bucket with approval process through Zapier integration. And that actually concludes our demos. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them now. I think there was another comment I was going to make. Oh, so yeah.
I'm going to throw the other poll.
Sorry.
Out there.
Yep. Did the poll disappear? So yeah, we have one more poll. Is understand what infrastructure as code framework are you using besides Terraform?
This is a follow-up for the 8 or 9 folks that answer that they are using infrastructure as code. I'm curious, if anybody's using something different or if they're just using Terraform.
If you're just using Terraform,
anybody's using Pulumi out there.
Yeah. What do you answer if you are just using Terraform and only Terraform?
So this is just for anybody who's using. Oh, I guess I didn't put that.
I guess you could skip.
That was my fault. We're doing it live. We're out here. So we've got 9 people so far that are using cloud specific. So your ARMs, your cloud formations, and all that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
I was definitely expecting a bunch of that.
Maybe we talk.
So multi-cloud is a thing for people who use multi-clouds, but multi-framework is too. There's folks that use Terraform and ARM and CloudFormation. I see that a lot.
I was going to say, I think that's exactly why we're seeing Terraform a lot, is because more and more organizations are preparing for multi-cloud. I I would say more than 90% of the customers you talk to are on a single cloud. But at the same time, they do have a multi-cloud strategy within the next 5 years. And that is why they're adopting Terraform as their framework of choice to prepare for that eventual need to use other
I have an
public
entire
clouds.
conference talk that kind of revolves around that a little bit about, some of the pitfalls of infrastructure as code. And one of the big things is, what framework are you going with? A lot of folks are going with Terraform because it is not only multi-cloud, but it's also multi-platform. So, I mean, you can utilize Terraform with not just, cloud providers, pretty much any of them at this point, but there's also providers for SaaS platforms. Like we have a Terraform provider for M0. So you can kind of use Terraform to manage our platform, to manage your Terraform. But then there's also like F5 has a Terraform provider that I'm pretty sure that you can utilize that against the, hardware, big IP appliances and stuff like that. So, choosing a Terraform or, infrastructure as code framework like a Terraform or a Pulumi or something can help you down the road. Like if you do need to migrate clouds or do that. Now you can't just say, here's my AWS Terraform and deploy it there, but it'll give you a lot better starting point than say, I have a CloudFormation template that I need to deploy as an ARM template. So it definitely something to think about for the folks that did mention that they're not quite there yet. Do your due diligence, make sure that you choose your framework carefully when you're jumping in, because just because you're 100% in AWS today doesn't mean that there may not be some form of, acquisition or something later from a company that uses all Azure. You never know what's going to happen. So definitely, planning ahead can help.
If you have any questions, again, please feel free to ask. Meanwhile, I think we can leave you with some contact information if you want to learn more, as well as you can, let's see, how do we do this? There you go. You can schedule a demo with us any moment. Simply click on that link. And if you're not ready right now,
so I
simply
see
go.
Michael says they're using Stratum from Microsoft, which is sort of an abstraction layer on top of Terraform. We're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff as well. And Microsoft not only is, they have ARM templates, but they've also released, I think they called it Bicep for their infrastructure as code automation.
Feel free to check us out on our Twitter and at M0 and our website, www.m0.com. What else?
I think what everybody has, been holding out for and waiting for, I think we have some Amazon gift cards to give away. I appreciate all the questions and everybody kind of hanging out. Especially Carlos here hanging out way past what would be my bedtime in the evening. Really, we're here. If you all want to ask some more questions and stuff like that, I mean, please feel free. Andrew and I have a wealth of experience, in the engineering space, in infrastructure as code and DevOps. We're definitely here to help you. If you want to reach out for me specifically, Twitter @VTimD on Twitter is the best way to get me. I mean, you could have my email and my phone number, but you'll still get me faster on Twitter, which worked out really well for me yesterday while Facebook was down.
Well, I will just go ahead and run through our Amazon gift card winners, and
Beautiful.
we'll wait just a few more minutes and see if any more questions come in.
Great.
So our 4 Amazon gift card winners are Barry P. So congratulations, Barry P. Larry M. Congratulations, Larry M. Rolf J. Congratulations, Rolf. And Michelle R. Michelle R. Congratulations to the 4 of you. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. And if you do not receive it, please check your spam folder. Let's check for questions one last time. Not seeing any. So any final closing remarks from the 2 of you?
It's been a pleasure spending this time with you. Please feel free to reach out, either Tim or myself.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for checking it out. Hopefully this was helpful for you. And And I always know that, when speaking at conferences and stuff like that, you can ask about questions in front of the group a million times, but sometimes people just want to come up to you afterwards. So please feel free to reach out to us, after the fact on the side. If you didn't want to throw it out there publicly, sometimes, security is a concern or privacy. So feel free to reach out and we're here to help.
All right. And just a quick reminder that today's session was recorded. So if you missed any or all of the presentation, or you would just like to rewatch it, it will be made available. Following this webinar, you will receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording living on the DevOps website. Just visit devops.com/webinars. Look in the on-demand section and it will be waiting for you. So thank you so much for putting this presentation together, Andrew and Tim. And I'd also like to thank our audience for being with us today. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great day, everybody.